Good evening. I'm the clerk for the Audit and Governance Committee, and as this is the first meeting of this year, I shall be opening the meeting. Okay, so I'll go straight into item number 1, which is apologies, and I can confirm that we have apologies from Councillor Fry with Councillor Rowley as substitute, Councillor Correas with Councillor Hollingsworth as substitute, and Councillor Jarvis with Councillor Muddyman as substitute. And just to let the committee know that Councillor Latif is running about 20 or 30 minutes late. Okay, so item number 2 is for the election of chair for this year. Can I ask for any nominations, please?
Nominate Councillor Fry.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder? Thank you. And could I have a vote with show of hands, please, for agreement for Councillor Fry as chair? Thank you. That's agreed. So in Councillor Fry's absence, I'll move on to item number 3, which is election of vice chair. Could I ask for any nominations, please? Thank you. And a seconder, please. Thank you. And with a show of hands again for agreement with that. Thank you. So that's Councillor Thomas nominated vice chair, and I'll now pass over to you to run the meeting. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So we move on to item 4 of the agenda, which is declarations of interest. If anybody has an interest to declare, please do so now. You can also do so later on in the meeting if you become aware of one while we're going. Just wave your hand at me and I'll pass over to you. If there are no interests to declare, we'll move on to item 5. Which is the investigation team annual report 22 to 23. And I believe it will be Scott Warner presenting this report. I'll hand over to Scott.
Well, indeed, thanks, Chair. Okay, so hopefully you've got a copy of the report in front of you. The aim of the annual report is to summarise the performance of the counter-fraud team for the financial year 2022 to 23. I'll provide a brief summary of the content and then invite any questions afterwards if there are any. So first impressions, it's been another great year for the team. And in terms of values, we've delivered just over £5 million in terms of increased revenue for the council and fraud losses that have been prevented. If you turn your attention to table 1, you'll see that our first performance measure there actually fell short of the target by 8. That target split into 2 components. One is council-owned properties that we bring back into use, and applications for housing that have been stopped through our intervention. Now, that's the 3rd consecutive year that we missed this target, and we are going to be looking to a different approach for this year, which makes better use of data sources to find irregularity. But the good news, our remaining targets were all exceeded, 2 of them in quite an exceptional way. Table 2 breaks down each of the areas where these values have been achieved. And again, I'll field questions on those at the end of the report. But the work in these areas brings our total to just over £5.1 million, which is something that I hope demonstrates value for money derived from retaining a counter-fraud team within the council. Section 5 sets out the fact that we ran our 7th annual fraud conference last year in the town hall, and that was another very successful event. Thanks to the support of sponsors and exhibitors, we were able to keep the event free to public sector delegates, and we also derived a healthy surplus, which contributed towards our trading income target. The event is now seen as an essential fixture for those in the profession, and as such, we've set a date for our next event as the 21st of November this year. On the back of the Oxford conference, it was decided to run a similar event in the Midlands, Birmingham in May of 22, had a slightly different format. It ran over 2 days instead of 1, and it carried a bit of a wider remit to what we undertake in the Oxford Fraud Conference, insofar as it applies to investigators in different areas rather than just council fraud teams. The event was supported and jointly delivered by 2 private sector firms who we work with, and it was again seen as a success with over 100 delegates in attendance. Okay, moving on to Appendix 1, that details the internal investigations that took place within the period. So again, I'll deal with that after the main report. Paragraphs 13 to 16 explain some of what we do from a commercial perspective, where we trade externally as the Oxford Investigation Service. And you'll see from paragraph 17 that we now have quite an extensive portfolio of external client partners in both the public and private sector. Our shared service partnership with Reigate and Banstead Borough Council continued throughout the year, where we delivered some exceptional results, continued to use each other's resources and shared our expertise to tackle fraud and irregularity all around the country. And from paragraph 21 onwards, it explains our ongoing involvement with grant schemes over the course of the year and the values attributed to our due diligence processes. And finally, the last part of the report summarises the financial effectiveness of the team as delivering more than 800% return on investment throughout the year. So very brief summary there, but I'll be happy to deal with any questions, comments or observations.
Before we move to questions, I just want to flag that this report has a confidential appendix. So if we're happy not to discuss that, we can continue now. If there is pressing need to, or if anybody would like to discuss the confidential appendix, then we will need to move into a confidential session, in which case I think it would probably be best to take this item at the end of the agenda. But so long as nobody's waving at me, we'll move into questions. I saw Mike first.
Just a very brief comment of more of congratulation, actually. The remarkable statistic that 15 out of 29 from my, we need to be doing this on my head, right to buy applications over the last complete financial year were identified as fraudulent. And stopping those not only saves a good deal of notional value that the council could lose, it also preserves a very important asset for Oxford people. So there's an example of the investigation team doing something which seems quite technical and number crunchy. It has consequences in the real world for people in need who the council exists for. So I think the team deserves special congratulations.
Yes, Alex, please go.
Yeah, mine was I'd add the congratulations. I just wasn't quite clear on the numbers. Table 1 and table 2 don't quite match. Table 1 on that one says 42 applications out of 81, which is 51 and well, it's 52%, which is the figure in the percentage in the comment in table 2. But it then says total achieved 64%. So I wasn't sure what that was 64% of. And in table 2, in the comment, it says 15 applications prevented, but then multiplies the maximum discount by 42. So I'm assuming that 42 is correct, that 15 isn't, and I have no idea what the 64% is. I do have a question on the confidential appendix, but it doesn't relate to its contents. So I don't think it's an issue confidentially wise. It was merely to ask whether the investigation that is mentioned in the confidential index has now been concluded, because the report only covers the previous year, if that's okay. I wasn't going to ask anything about it, simply whether or not it's concluded.
I think that's fair. I'll bring Scott back in.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll take the first part of that question. Yeah, there's obviously an error in that table, and that's on me for missing that. The correct figure is 42 applications of 81 that were prevented over the course of the year. And then it was an oversight on my part on the calculation. My apologies. Second part of the question: that investigation is still ongoing.
Any further comments, questions? Just to say the numbers are brilliant, and to echo what Scott said, that it really is value for money and a really important part of what the council does. So congratulations there. And also to say that, looking at these tables, it does look like we're consistently outperforming our targets. And for me, that brings to mind the question you know, can they be more ambitious? I think they realistically could be. So that's the only one I'd put to you.
Okay, thank you for the kind words. And in terms of ambitious targets, I'll refer to Nigel, who sets my targets. So it may be that we experience an increase thanks to that.
Brilliant, thank you, Scott. And Alex had something else.
Yes, it's just a question of, obviously, it's a very successful story. A lot of fraudulent applications, you know, it's sometimes difficult to work out whether it's error or not. You know, there's a test for, you know, a criminal culpability, which is obviously going to be higher than what you're picking up. But in any of these, whether it's the right to buy applications, have you identified anything which might lead to prosecution? So not just somebody kind of being a little bit over ambitious with their interpretation of what a question might be asking, but, you know, a genuine criminal act, conspiracy to defraud, as it were. And you can see the difference between the two things.
Sure. So a lot of the work we do in the right to buy process is preventative, so that it becomes at the start of the process. So we apply an enhanced due diligence process where we obtain ID of anybody involved in the purchase, and we trace the funds back right to the very source in the interest of anti-money laundering measures. Now, a lot of the times every time we ask some fairly intrusive questions, and where individuals don't respond to those questions or fail to supply the information, we take a balance of probabilities decision that there was something either fraudulent or irregular with that application. So in terms of measuring that, all we can see is the applications that don't progress. In terms of right to buy applications that are already in the system, because they've gone through such a rigorous process, we're happy to say that the detection rate is very low, and we found nothing suitable to progress to prosecution.
Yep, Councillor Smith.
Okay, can you hear me now? Is that right? Okay, thank you. So I hadn't realised that. I'm concentrating on my questions so much. I wanted to ask, I mean, it's great when you sort of uncover things, but from an audit point of view, are there any processes that you now have seen that you could say, actually, this process needs to change? So the errors that you found, the things that have slipped through, whatever it is that you've now found and prevented being a fraudulent case coming forward, are there any things that perhaps as an audit committee we need to say, actually, this needs a closer look at, this procedure, it could be changed, and it could be actually less work for your team, but actually better for the council? Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. So we're always striving for ongoing improvement and bolstering up access to services and gateways. By virtue of a lot of the investigations undertake, we quite often identify system weaknesses and vulnerabilities. So our reports, more often than not, will put these recommendations in place for service areas to tighten up on those. So it's common practice across the organisation with us.
Follow up. Surely the audit committee would like to know that in a report, actually, if we can't know of any instances that you can give us. You've mentioned that's happened. It would be good, I think, for us as an audit committee to know what those areas are. And it might be something that we'd want BDO to look at part of their audit plan.
Sure, and we work very closely with BDO, often engage in their assistance when we find areas which need a little bit of extra scrutiny. And we'll share process recommendations with them and identify the best ones to go forward with. But we can certainly summarise those in each area for the next report.
Thanks very much. There are no other questions. We expertly sidestepped having to go into confidential session, which is always brilliant. So thanks very much. And I'll move us on to item 6 of the agenda, which I believe has no confidential appendices. And that's page 19 of your agenda reports pack, avoiding bribery, fraud and corruption policy, and handing back over to our
Chair, I think we have to, as a committee,
to note
that we note that.
Yes,
yeah,
we note the
to
previous
note
reports.
the
We don't need to vote,
minutes.
I think. Yeah, please, thank you. Yes, on to item 6, avoiding bribery, fraud and corruption policy, and passing back on to Counter Fraud Manager Scott Warner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and you'll be pleased to know this is a much quicker item. So the policy, the anti-bribery, fraud and corruption policy, was introduced in 2019, and that replaced the previous policy, which was previously reviewed in 2013. So I've been reviewing the policy and the legislation regularly since then, and there's not been any changes of significance, and this year is the same. Now, with an organisation the size of Oxford, there's always going to be a risk of misconduct, criminality and wrongdoing from within. So in order to mitigate that risk, we need a policy like this that provides clear definitions, sets out duties, roles, responsibilities, and platforms to report when concerns arise. This policy just does that, and it provides details about how instances of fraud, bribery and corruption should be dealt with by the organisation. The overarching legislation for this policy is the Bribery Act 2010. Earlier in the year, there was a change to the Act around the maximum imprisonment on conviction, but that's got no effect on the policy itself. I've updated some of the terms in reference to team names, but other than that, it remains the same. So the aim of the report is just to confirm the policy remains in place, that it's been reviewed and no changes are necessary. Just as an added note, in terms of training and awareness, my team deliver fraud awareness training across the council in services on a rolling basis, and this policy features as part of that training. And it's also covered in new employee induction training. We'll periodically add some detail to the council's website as well to publicise any changes and to refresh memories about when the policy, what the policy is and where.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And I draw people's attention also to part 14, paragraph 15 on the duty of members of the council and co-opted members, and also part 14, paragraph 18, the responsibilities of the Audit and Governance Committee, to make sure that we're aware of that. Any comments, or can we move to approving the reviewed policy? Alex?
Sorry, Vice Chair. Comes of appointing substitutes who come along with questions you've probably already dealt with. Obviously, the policy's not changed significantly since the last review, which is fair enough. Has there been a review of how well it's working, I guess, is the question. So, for example, there's the cross-reference to the whistleblowing policy in paragraph 13, which is obviously quite key. So it'd be interesting to know whether there has been a review of whether the whistleblowing, because the avoiding bribery, fraud and corruption policy is only as good as the whistleblowing policy, and vice versa. So have we sort of checked that that's working as it should? And yeah, I guess we would do that by some kind of in-depth review of whether council employees and indeed members, as the chair says, felt that they understood how to go about this and weren't in any way dissuaded from making use of the policy to report things that they might be concerned about.
Scott?
Sure, yeah. So we have received a number of concerns that were raised through the whistleblowing policy and referred individuals to this policy because we quite rightly point out they are connected. The whistleblowing policy is refreshed regularly as well. So we help raise awareness of that at the same time that we deliver fraud awareness training.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it's unrelated. It's not meant to sound related. We have a number of responsibilities for member code of conduct things, for example, which end up coming to the standards board for how parish councils behave. Does this policy, or is this one of those things where we're also looking at some third-party organisations like the parish councils, or are they, in this instance, entirely separate in the way that their members' conduct stuff is less separate?
Scott?
So yes, it is a separate policy. This just covers the core organisation.
There's nothing else. Can we move to approve the report? Just nod to approve. Brilliant. Thanks all. And moving on to the next item, item 7 has confidential appendices, which I imagine we will want to discuss. So I propose that we take that at the end of the agenda. So if we're happy, can we move on to item 8, which is the update on the 2021-2022 annual accounts? And I believe Adrian will be presenting this one. Do we have Adrian?
Yeah, I'm here, Chair. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to take the committee through. So it was really just a verbal update. There was, I just came back from annual leave on Monday, and since I came back, there was a letter out which I shared with Nigel and Bill earlier today, actually, which came out from the Minister from the Department for Levelling Up and Houses and Community. And I think I just wanted to give the committee a brief update in terms of some of the context in that, because I think it's really important for them to understand the kind of direction that the potential this has in terms of for the delayed audits that we've kind of previously reported to. So I'll just take the committee through some of the kind of key points, and I've asked Nigel to share the letter that I've shared with him earlier today as well. And obviously at the next committee, we'll probably give a fuller update on that in terms of some of the movement that's happened since today's meeting. So if I just take the committee through some of the key points. So for members of the committee who've been around for the last period, we've kind of regularly reported, and Nigel's reported himself some of the delays that have occurred within the local audit sector. We've also reported on the Redmond report, which came out a few years ago, and some of the recommendations from that. So since then, I think it's fair to say that the position hasn't really improved. And as of today, I think there's something like over 500 audit opinions still unsigned going back to 15-16. So the Minister for Communities has actually kind of taken some quite bold action to try and resolve that, with a view that actually, if things continue as they are, the local position and the national position is probably going to get worse. So
No, I haven't sent it. Yes.
Seems that we've lost Adrian. We'll give it a few more seconds, and if not, we might have to move on.
I just took you through some. With that, they've also engaged with some of the key stakeholders, and I suppose if we think some of those key stakeholders being the National Audit Office, who actually issued the Code of Practice, also the Financial Reporting Council, who provide a key role in the regulation of local audits. They've also worked through with some of the Section 151 officers to try and understand some of the pressures that they and their teams have been under.
Right, so we've lost Adrian. I think maybe it's best if we move on and come back. But if anybody else has... Okay.
If you like, I could sort of cover, I think, probably what Adrian was going to say.
Brilliant, thanks, Bill. That would be very helpful. Okay,
so in terms of what Rowley said was that they're going to actually pass through some regulations, legislation, and advice to audit firms in order to enable them to have a look at all of the outstanding audits and take a pragmatic view towards them, and potentially sign off audits with various qualifications and potentially some clarification as to what elements of the audit haven't been completed. And that way kind of gives some assurance of the really old sets of accounts in order that the local audit sector can move on. That can then have a knock-on effect to subsequent audit periods, especially if there's a significant difference, because you've then got the brought forward balances. So those probably will end up being more tricky than the general delays in the external audit process. And may well need more kind of attention from audit firms. But the idea is to some extent, to streamline the audit process in order to speed things up and basically get up to date, because otherwise the local audit position is just going to keep falling backwards and fall further behind. So probably for a lot of authorities that are in this backlog, including ourselves, there could end up being sort of some differences in scale, but some levels of qualification on accounts to then allow firms and the audited authorities to move on with catching up with recent ones. I mean, I must say that as I say, the danger is that if you get some qualifications, that qualification can hang on and be a qualification relating to the following period. It depends on the scale of it. And I think that's something really that hasn't been outlined as to exactly how they're going to approach it yet. And it's something I think that will have to be worked out with audit firms, because obviously they have a level of professional conduct that they've got to comply with. Now that Adrian's back, I hope that I've covered kind of what Adrian was going to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bill. I think that's kind of consistent with what I was going to say. So I think there's just a few other points I'd probably want to say as well, is that one of the areas that they still want to maintain is the value for money conclusion. So they think that's important, that the audit firms still do enough work to be able to give a value for money conclusion, especially given some of the financial sustainability pressures we've seen with Section 114 notices. So that was one of the areas that they thought was important, that could continue through, and actually was important that the commentary was still given for those. How they do that between subsequent years, they're not quite sure, but it may well be that we do one period and then we follow that subsequently on with one commentary, as opposed to having to do separate pieces of work. And I think one of the other areas that they want to prioritise is pension fund audits. I think nationally they believe that pension fund audits are significant from the point of view of some of the significance, obviously, from asset valuation prices and some of the inputs that has into triennial valuation. So I think those were the two areas that they wanted to prioritise to kind of continue with. But obviously, as Bill said, that the kind of principle is that they would try and move through those years where there actually hasn't been an audit opinion, with a view to trying to get back to a cycle which is more manageable, and actually then audit firms can kind of reset with local clients and kind of make sure that actually both the client and also the audit firm themselves are held more accountable. I think that's one of the other key points that the Minister has pointed out to in the letter, is that they want more accountability where audit opinions and deadlines are missed. And that's both a reflection for audit firms, which are also monitored in that nationally, locally, but also locally as well, where actually there is local issues where, particularly say, there's pressure on finance teams and they're unable to produce a set of accounts. So the Minister did want to kind of make that point, actually, to say that there needs to be a refocus in terms of meeting deadlines, and actually that's a responsibility for both auditors and also Section 151 officers as well. So hopefully, as I say, there hasn't been any concrete timeline yet, but they do hope to have arrangements in place before the end of December 23. So hopefully by the time the next committee meets on the end of September, we should have much more information in terms of what it means, both nationally but also locally as well, when local audit partners will be looking through their audit portfolio and also discussing with local clients to kind of understand what it might mean for them, because obviously we're quite a way through the 21-22 audit with Bill and his team, and we're due to restart back in September again. So we need to have a look at that to understand exactly, how much work's been done and how much is work still required to be completed to kind of sign the opinion for 21-22. And obviously we haven't started the 22-23 audit yet, which is kind of one of those which there may be then that impact of kind of moving forward between audit years. So happy to take any questions from the committee. I appreciate that you haven't actually seen the letter itself yet. I only shared it with Bill and Nigel a few hours ago, so we will send that on. Obviously, if you have any questions, once the letter is shared and you want to send those through, I'm more than happy to come back to you with a more formal response.
Brilliant. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Bill. And I'll just bring Bill in again.
Yeah, just adding on to the 21-2 audit, just as a quick update. We've had the audit letter from the external auditors of Oxford Direct Services Limited now. So that still needs to go via the board, but that's pretty close to being signed off. So what we're doing as a council, obviously it impacts both on the council and on the council's group accounts, so single entity and group. And so therefore for the council's external auditors coming in September, we're putting together a revised set of accounts with some narrative for the auditors to guide them through, along with the group accounts, which weren't available at the time they started the audit. So that's a very recent update on the position.
Thank you very much. I've seen hands from Councillors Hollingsworth and Smith. So Councillor Hollingsworth.
Well, the first thing was a comment just to agree about the concerns if there's accounts that aren't fully signed off or come with comments. Both the City Council and the County Council were in this situation for, I think, 6 years. From the late 1990s onwards, thanks to an individual commonly referred to as a struck-off accountant resident in Weston Road. That's how the Democratic Services officer at the time used to refer to him, because he couldn't bring himself to use his name. But the district audit at that point essentially, took 6 years to resolve his challenge, and during that time, neither council were able to sign off their accounts, which was deeply unsatisfactory and had knock-on impacts in terms of workload internally and reputation externally. So it's not good. The second thing is, if I'm looking at the letter correctly, which I've found on the government website, there's a lot of quite complex stuff which I've sped read, so probably haven't understood properly. But one of the proposed resolutions, as well as having qualified accounts as a kind of way to go forward, seems to be getting rid of some of the differences between national and local government accounting practice in order to make it easier to bring the accounts together at once. And something which may be harmless and may not be, which is considering changes to the Code of Audit Practice relating to certain balances in the accounts. So changes of process being introduced. We as a council with a relatively complex set of arrangements because of the wholly owned companies, is there a danger that the government, in trying to come up with some simple process in order to ensure that there isn't an audit backlog, actually makes it impossible or more challenging, or more optimistically, for councils like ourselves to proceed with our existing arrangements? Will we end up sort of by accident being forced into making different arrangements? It's the kind of thing governments will do by accident without thinking it through. But it'd be interesting to get some views on that.
I don't know if Adrian or Bill wants to come in on that now. Adrian?
Yeah, I can take that, Councillor Hollingsworth. So I think the reference there is maybe in respect of some of the balances around. So nationally, we had this infrastructure asset last year, which actually delayed audit opinions for almost a year. So I think the balances that we're referring to are kind of with reference to users of the financial statements. So, and I think the argument that the government minister there is making actually, what value does infrastructure assets have to the users of the financial statements? So I think it's more around some of the balances actually, which can take up quite a lot of work and quite a lot of time. And actually, I think the argument they're trying to make is kind of trying to focus on the areas of the accounts, maybe on the income and expenditure side, rather than some of the asset side, where I don't mean the short-term investments or cash and cash equivalents, but some of the property, plant and equipment, for example, and also infrastructure asset balances, which may be considered less inconsequential from the point of view that they don't actually impact the general fund, because they're actually reversed out due to the technical accounting principles. So I think that's where they're possibly headed with that. But again, until we get further information, I think we just have to watch this space.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Smith, please.
Thank you, Adrian, for that update. Yeah, I mean, I've seen the letter through, obviously being chairing the county meeting last week, in fact, actually, and it's this frustrating, actually, that it has taken a year for them to get to this point. The government, I hasten to add, not our auditors. Just a question. I know that EY are trying to catch up as much as they can with the 2021 audits to get them signed off. What's your sort of prognosis for signing off? I mean, I think you sort of said towards September, October, possibly for sign off. That would be great. Are you, and this is a question to Bill as well, are you finding there are more questions coming in for the EY team that you're having just 5 days to respond to, quicker turnaround time, because they are pushing to get these audits, these accounts signed off? That's a question to Bill. And just a comment to Adrian as well, and to the committee, in fact, actually. I think what is quite worrying is seeing more Section 114s coming forward from more councils around the country, not due to this accounting business, but actually to investments that they've made and now coming to the fore, poor investments that they've made. And I wondered if you had any comments on those ones at all as an external auditor, Adrian.
Adrian?
Yeah, I can probably go first on that one, Councillor Smith. So I think we issued our value for money commentary on the 2021 accounts back in May 21 for the City Council. Nigel had brought a really helpful paper actually, and I think, you know, one of the things that Nigel was very probably forefront of mind was to kind of reassure the committee at that time, when I think the first Section 114 notice was issued, to kind of talk around some of the principles of that and what the council had done locally. So we're obviously concerned nationally from the point of view of the increase in the Section 114 notices. I think the work we've done through our value for money commentary recently, and also the work we'll do to conclude this audit. Obviously, we haven't concluded that yet, but certainly we hadn't raised any concerns at that stage in terms of some of the local pressures. Obviously, Nigel has regularly reported to committee some of the impact from COVID and, for example, some of the dividend delays which have come through from some of the groups. So I think, you know, there's been lots of open transparency around some of the local council position in terms of their financial position, and certainly the position with respect to their group structure. But certainly there is concern nationally in terms of the increase in terms of the Section 114. But I think hopefully locally we haven't seen anything where we're flagging, you know, major issues around financial sustainability. Certainly the council was in a good position financially pre-COVID, and obviously as we work through COVID and come out the other side, it's a kind of refocus and to kind of take stock. So as soon as we come back in again in September, we'll be refocusing back to look at we obviously have to do some piece of work around our going concern position, and with that we would also look at the position of the group and the subsidiaries, and we'd also consider if there have been any letters of support issued to any of the subsidiaries specifically. So again, that's a piece of work that we'll do through September, October, and report back to this committee. But again, it is a concern nationally, but I think locally we haven't raised any concerns which have been significant for this committee and also for the council specifically. I don't know, Nigel, if you want to come in on that at any point at all, or.
No, I think just to support what you said, Adrian, you know, the area of going concern is one I know the auditors drilled down quite significantly on, and I think we gave sufficient certainty at the time he did the audit to you know, confirm that we were still going concern, and that remains the case. I think as you highlighted the pressures that we had accumulated during the pandemic, some of which are still there and we are still dealing with basically. But I think, you know, we are seeing certainly financially we're coming out the back end of that now.
Brilliant, thank you both. We're happy with that. Very helpful questions and helpful answers too. Do we have any others? Sorry, Bill, do you want to come in as well?
Yes, because some of that question I think was aimed at me, and certainly my team, when audit queries come in, when EY restart their audit, we'll be turning around the queries as quick as we can. There are some, depending on the query, that will take longer, but we will liaise with EY. We have a weekly meeting during an audit period. So we'll be updating EY and keeping them in touch as to exactly where we are. I think it's in everybody's interest to get all of this completed, because we're currently running with a couple of open year ends, which nobody wants. So yes, our team internally would want to get this finished as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, if not, we will move on to item 9. So this is the annual report and statement of assurance 22 to 23, and you can find it on page 39 of your agenda packs. I believe Senior Auditor Greg Rubing will be presenting it. Greg, do you want to take over?
Thank you and good evening, everyone. I'm just introduced myself for those I haven't met before. I'm a partner in BDO and have acted as the head of internal audit for the year just gone. So this report summarises our work for the year, so there shouldn't be any surprises in it because the reports have been presented previously to the committees. We've given overall moderate assurance. That's our second highest level of assurance. And I think to sum up, I would say, in quite a challenging year, the control environment has held up reasonably well. We do have more limited reports than we had last year. Last year there was 1, this year there's 2, one on income generation and another on the confidential part of the agenda, which we'll cover later. But out of the 9 reports, 7 are either moderate or substantial assurance, and we've had very positive reports on areas like car parking, treasury management and business rates. So I think overall we are comfortable with that opinion. I'd also say in terms of implementation of recommendations. My colleague Yasmin will cover that in terms of the latest position. I would say overall the council's doing okay, but could do better. But as I say, the detail of that will be covered later. The other thing I would, just a couple of other points to make. Firstly, the opinion, we don't have at the moment the work we do on ODS and the companies. That work is ongoing, so those annual reports have yet to be presented. So we'll produce a summary at a later date of that work, but nothing has come out so far in the year that suggests that would impact on the opinion we've given. The other point just to make is, unfortunately, you've got a slightly outdated copy of the report. We did update it in a couple of areas, which is not in the papers in front of you, so we will provide that separately. There's nothing significant. It's mainly a bit more around the financial context, around some of the themes, and also the added value, because I did want to point out that we did, the income generation audit did identify a number of income generating opportunities for the council for commercial income not invoiced. So that's in the updated version as well. We'll produce that separately. That's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Okay, brilliant. Do I see any hands? We have no questions, nothing. Okay, happy to move on to note the reports. Brilliant. Thank you. Next, we have a couple of items that I think maybe it might make sense to move around. Item 10 of the agenda has a confidential report that I think we will probably want to go into confidential session to discuss. Then item 11 of the agenda kind of works quite well with that one. So I wonder if it's worth taking item 11 and then item 10 when we move into confidential session at the end of all the other items. If anybody has a different proposal, let me know. It does make a complicated agenda that bit more complicated, but I hope it will make our lives easier, and it will make it more accessible for the public should they want to be present for the items that aren't confidential. So skipping items 10 and 11 for the moment, and moving on to item 12, recruitment and retention of audit update. That can be found on page 63 of your agenda reports packs. And I'm expecting Gail Malkin to present this one. Do we have Gail?
Yes.
Excellent, sorry. I can see you there now, Gail. Brilliant. If I could hand over to you, thanks.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gail Malkin. I head up the people team. I'll just do a summary of the report. So I think everyone understands that we've got recruitment challenges across the authority, with some roles much more difficult to fill than others. Those are roles like environmental health officers, surveyors and lawyers. Retention is less of an issue for the council. Our employee turnover is around 8.5% and has been pretty stable for the last 12 to 18 months. However, it is important that we hold on to our talent. So retention is something that we are concerned about, because if people do leave, then replacement is difficult. In terms of our response to recruitment and retention challenges, we've improved our approach to attracting candidates and seeking out candidates. The recruitment consultant role that's been in place for about 8 or 9 months now is proving to be successful. So the person in that role approaches candidates via LinkedIn, is actively seeking out candidates. In addition to that, we still offer secondment opportunities for people so that they've got an opportunity to develop. We've got some career progression routes in planning, for example, and we've tried to make it easier for people to apply. So we invite people to apply by CV now, rather than insist on an application form for every role. So that's made a difference. Work that's in progress. We want to promote Oxford City Council as an employer more effectively. So better sort of imagery, stories on LinkedIn, video content. We're working on making our processes more efficient. So we've reduced time to hire, and also make the sort of candidate experience a bit more user friendly. And we're working on identifying preferred suppliers for permanent recruitment. We've got preferred suppliers for temporary recruitment in place, and that works well. But we're looking at permanent recruitment to see if we can reduce some costs, but also develop better relationships with a smaller number of agencies. And we've also got plans to do some training for managers in the autumn. And that's about manager capability, but it's also about inclusive recruitment practices. Sum up of the report. I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
Brilliant, thank you, Gail. I see a hand from Councillor Smith first.
Thank you. Always good to hear that there's more applicants coming in. It's increased the number of applicants that are applying for jobs with the council. That's a good thing to have. Just wondered actually, of the few people that we are saying goodbye to, what sort of trends there are coming from the exit interviews. So that's one question. And if I may, Chair, another question. In the report, it mentions that you're negotiated a new contract with Reed as an agency for temporary staff, and that helps to provide payroll only service for the candidates that have been secured for temporary roles to provide a bit of time and cost saving. But then it moves on to say Reed's not always able to find candidates, and so the council supplements this with its own searches for candidates, but then hands over to Reed to deal with all the administration. Is that cost effective? That's a good way, a use of money, is it, to hand over the whole thing to deal with the administration on payroll rather than doing it ourselves? Or is it just because it might be too complicated?
Gail?
A couple of questions there. Okay, thank you.
Okay. In terms of exit interview themes, we don't have a lot of reliable data at the moment. We're just developing a new approach to exit interviews so that people can complete them online. But it's sort of anecdotal rather than having any hard data. People, recent leavers have been leaving for better opportunities. So that could be a promotion or better pay. So we've seen that happening in law and governance, and we've seen that happening in ICT. Generally, there's a range of reasons why people leave. So some people take career breaks or move on to do new and different things. Of course, we've got people who are retiring from the organisation as well. But generally, at the moment, I would say the trend is that people are finding career development opportunities more than any other reason. In terms of Reed, so Reed, we've got a good arrangement with Reed. They supply us with temporary staff. However, they can't always find temporary staff. So we will attempt to identify some candidates ourselves. And it is more cost effective if we then hand them back to Reed, and at a much reduced cost, they then manage the individual on our behalf. So if we've got a short-term opportunity, so it could be perhaps some temporary support for 8 weeks, then it's much more cost effective to work via Reed rather than recruit them onto our own payroll.
Brilliant, thanks. Councillor Rowley.
I can't hear anything. Is it just me?
Yes, sorry, could you speak through? You were speaking so loudly, I didn't notice, but to us it's loud, but to people online, if I could remind everybody to keep their mics on. Thank you.
Sorry. We understand from page 65 of the report that applications are up by nearly a third, which is excellent news. But at the same time, vacancy rates are more or less, the number of vacancies is more or less constant. Is that because more people are leaving council employment, or because a smaller proportion of the applicants are suitable for the job, or for some other reason?
Okay. Gail?
Okay, so applications are up because we are actively searching for candidates, and primarily through LinkedIn, which is not something the council was using 12 months ago as a tool. So that's one reason why applications are up. The second is that because people can apply by CV more readily now. In terms of vacancy rates, they are pretty constant. So employee turnover has been pretty constant. We have also had new roles in the organisation. These may be short-term roles or permanent roles, but we've seen an increase in number of roles. So for an example of that is selective licensing, where we've recruited a whole new team. So there isn't any, it's not that, it's pretty steady in terms of leavers and number of vacancies.
That's really helpful context. Thank you. Councillor Hollingsworth and then Councillor Muddyman.
Yeah, my question is around apprenticeships or equivalents thereof, professional apprenticeships in particular, and some of the protracted, I imagine is probably the right word, areas of recruitment challenge. So this highlights lawyers, but building surveyors has been an issue for a significant period. Planning used to be, but since the instigation of the planning apprenticeship scheme a few years ago, now on the third cohort of that issue, never said has gone away, but it's much less of an issue, and has helped not just with growing your own, as it were, but also recruiting in. You kind of establish a whole load of relationships. So the question is, given some of those challenges around building surveying, about lawyers and so on, is there work we can do to expand on those apprenticeship type programs? And they're really probably more CPD, sort of top end apprenticeships, so the professional apprenticeship types of things. Would that help, do you think, in those areas?
Thank you, Gail.
Yes, I do think it will help. In fact, with building surveyors, we are now in the middle of an apprenticeship recruitment campaign, and we've made 2 offers to building surveyor apprentices, and they are at A level and will move into an apprenticeship. As you say, planning has been successful and will continue to carry on that process in planning. We've recently so we have got an apprentice lawyer at the moment, so someone who's being developed and supported. So it would be good to build the number of apprenticeships that we offer. One of the challenges we have is in terms of resources. So managers don't always have the capacity within their budgets to be able to offer an apprenticeship. So that can be a struggle. I think though as well, in fact, I've been talking about this week, I think there might be some opportunities for developing people from different parts of the organisation. So maybe offering some internal career development. So this could be people working in customer services, for example. So I think that's potentially a source of talent that we need to be looking at in the future.
Brilliant, thank you. Councillor Muddyman.
I can't hear.
Sorry, I was trying to use the wrong one. Sorry. Thank you for the report. On page 64, in the section about the national context, you said, and as you mentioned, you say that we have a relatively low turnover rate compared to other local authorities. And I just wondered if you've got any more information about what other local authorities are experiencing and sort of what the difference is. And second part of the question is our rate of 8.5%, how is that sort of broken down against sort of senior and less senior and sort of junior roles? Where, because I'm assuming that's an average across all of them. So are we experiencing a bigger issue with more senior roles or with more junior roles?
Brilliant, thank you, Gail.
So I don't have any hard data on other local authority turnover rates. although I have now got a route in to access some of that data, because we've recently joined South East Employers Organisation, and they do collect this data. In fact, they've just opened up a survey, so it's a live survey right now. But I do know from talking to other HR professionals in other local authorities that typically it would be double the rate that we see, if not more. So you're looking at maybe ranges of 15 to 20%. But that's just anecdotal, just talking to other professionals.
Okay, thank you. So the other question.
Yeah, and so in terms of the mix, I think I don't have the data at my fingertips. We do provide employee turnover data by service area, but I think it's a mix of roles. So we might be losing more junior people who've got, you know, promotion opportunities elsewhere, and we have lost people at a senior level as well recently, senior managers, for example, in ICT. So it's a broad range.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much. Any other questions on this one? Okay. If not, are we happy to note the reports? Brilliant. And moving on to item 13 of the agenda. Glancing. I don't think this one has confidential appendices. So it's Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000, page 69 of your agenda reports pack. I think I'm expecting Emma Griffiths to present this one. Emma, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm hoping this is quite a straightforward report for you. You'll have read that the Council has available to it various powers to undertake covert surveillance as part of its investigations, and you heard from Scott earlier about the sort of work that his team carries out. There are strict parameters around the use of the powers in the legislation, and there are various codes of conduct as well that the Council has to adhere to. Perhaps for those reasons, and perhaps for others, I'm afraid my hands-on knowledge as to why the Council hasn't used the powers isn't up to date. I don't know if you've still got Scott there with you. We could perhaps ask him, but the Council hasn't used the powers for many years now. There's actually an error in paragraph 3, and I've referred there to the years 2017 to 2018, but in fact this is to report to you that for the year 2022 to 23, the Council didn't use the powers. The Council is, though, required to have a policy and ensure its officers are properly trained. The new revised policy is appended to the report at Appendix 1. It's been refreshed only to update legislation. Various provisions have been updated to refresh post titles of officers. We've included a section on monitoring social media. Obviously, there's been an increase in the use of social media in recent years, and so we've included that within the policy. We've included various hyperlinks to national guidance and statutory provisions, and we've included a section for those who might wish to complain about the way that the Council uses any of the powers available to it. You'll have read that the policy covers a description of the types of surveillance that might be carried out, the way that authorisations are given, and the process that's involved. So if any of the powers are to be used, there's an internal process of authorisation, and then an application has to be made to the Magistrates' Court. And the policy also covers the keeping of records. But as I outlined, the Council has not for many years used any of the powers available to it in any of its investigations. The policy hasn't been reviewed since 2018, so it was due for refresh. And I'd like to highlight that training is provided for authorising and investigating officers. And the senior responsible officer in terms of the legislation is the head of law and governance. And that's all set out in the policy also. And so the committee's asked to approve the policy as refreshed, please. Thank you.
Brilliant, that's very helpful. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Yeah, I just wanted a question to understand about the directed surveillance bit. So I'm going to use a real life example. One of my constituents, not that he wishes to be surveyed, but he wishes others to be surveyed on a regular basis. He's very keen on preventing litter. He has a number of people who he believes are responsible for litter and would very much like the council to use CCTV cameras to detect them in the heinous behaviours that he believes them to be responsible for. So, for example, if we were worried about a fly tipping problem, say in a particular area, and put up a CCTV camera as a deterrent, because you'd need to put up a sign, so it's not covert, so the thing is up there. At what point does that go from general directed surveillance into covert surveillance or intrusive surveillance? So this is the kind of thing that my constituent would love us to do everywhere. He'd love cameras in every part of the city to catch miscreants dropping cans and things.
Well, I think, I mean, is Scott still there? I can't see. Is that Scott sat there?
No, he isn't. Sorry, Emma.
Oh, no. Okay. So CCTV is sort of special and, you know, has its own rules. But, you know, if we've set up a camera and it's just in a fixed position, we're less likely to find ourselves intruding on someone's personal life because it's, you know, on that fixed spot. We're not focused on that person, following them around in their daily life. We're not going to be finding out particular information that's, you know, private information about them. And a lot of this surveillance has to meet a threshold, so it's got to be serious enough. The crime or the suspected, the suspected crime that we're trying to prevent or find out evidence in relation to, has got to be serious enough to warrant the use of directed and covert surveillance. So dropping of litter would not meet the test, I'm afraid.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, sorry, Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I find this all interesting. As a RIPA, I find it quite an interesting legislation that we have to use as councils. It would be useful, I think, to have it. I mean, it's obviously all written here about how the authorisation happens with RIPA, but would it be possible to have a very simple diagram to show the sequence for the authorisation?
Yeah.
So going up to
we
the
can do
magistrates' court, that would be useful, I think, for everybody to understand it a bit better too.
Yeah. So would you like that to be included in this policy, or would you like that to be?
I think it would be useful, actually, yeah, because if there is somebody that does need to use the RIPA, then it is very clear about how the authorisation works.
That sounds good to me. I'm seeing nodded agreement as well. So thank you, Councillor Smith.
So in terms of approval of the policy at this point, does that mean that you're not happy to approve it until you've seen a flowchart, or could we append a flowchart to the policy if you approve this?
I think it would be quite nice to see a flowchart. I think it would simplify it for some of us to understand exactly how the authorisation happens. And it could be appended to this, but it could become just back as a note possibly to the next A&G meeting. I mean,
any other thoughts on that?
So we'd be approving it subject to the addition of a flow chart and a note to say this is what the flow chart looks like, so we can see it.
Like that.
Is that clear for the minutes? Yeah. Okay. So could people nod their approval on with that condition? Excellent. Brilliant. Okay. So now it gets a little bit messy. I think we'll leave items 14 and 15 to the end of the agenda because they're end of the agenda items, and it will confuse me if we don't. But if we move now to item 11, so jump back in your agenda, internal audit follow-up reports, July 2023, which I don't believe has confidential appendices, but is nice. It goes nicely with item 10. And I'm expecting Yasmin to present this one. Yasmin Ahmed. If you could take it away, Yasmin.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, can everyone hear me? All right, I've just got... Oh, you can, okay. Just in terms of the follow-up then, in total there were 20 recommendations due for the July 2023, end of July. There were 15 recommendations from reports issued in 21-22 and 5 recommendations from reports issued in 22-23. 5 recommendations on private rented sector and environment have been implemented, and these were all medium level priority recommendations. 10 recommendations, mainly from the environment audit, which contained 1 high priority and 9 medium recommendations, are still incomplete, and we've issued revised due dates, and we'll be following them up either in September or December, depending on the dates that we have agreed. I'm happy to go into any further detail if needed, but I'll stop there.
Okay, Councillor Mudderman.
Thank you for that. Just looking at the overdue recommendations on page 45 of the report. It's a medium priority. It's the one at the top of that page says the council should review its governance arrangements. That one seems to have been delayed the longest. It's been delayed for a whole year, and I can't, in the notes on the side, I don't see sort of an explanation as to why that one in particular has been delayed so long.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yasmin, if you could come back on that.
We did speak to the Executive Director of Development, and they did assure us that they are progressing this action, and it will be completed for December 2023, and they are presenting it to the Net Zero Senior Group meeting on the 24th of July as well. We followed this the recommendation up in June, so the meeting had not been undertaken at that stage, but we will follow up again in September just to see where they've got in terms of the progress, and then again for December as well. So I won't generally just go by the December due date. I'll ensure that in September we also follow it up to see what progress has been made to date. I can't give a further explanation in terms of the delay, but we have tried to set now more realistic due dates for that to be followed up and completed in December, and will request for the Executive Director of Development to attend the Audit and Governance Committee for an explanation if that isn't completed by the December due date.
Brilliant, thank you. That's something that Councillor Fry passed on as a concern that he wanted raised in the meeting as well. So thank you for anticipating you, Councillor Mudderman, and bringing that up. It would be definitely helpful to have some, kind of better deadlines, and it's nice to have reassurance there. Any other questions, comments? If not, we can move to note the reports. If everybody's happy, please nod. And we'll move now into confidential session, which means I'm going to read you a chunk of text. So if we're happy to move into confidential session, the committee wishes to exclude the press and public from the meeting during consideration of any of the items on the exempt from publication part of the agenda. It will be necessary for, it says cabinet, should that read the committee? Sorry. It will be necessary for the committee to pass a resolution in accordance with the provisions of paragraph 4 to B of the local decisions come into effect after the latest, if the local decisions come into effect after the latest of the expiry of the post-meeting councillor call-in period, reconsideration of a called-in decision or council's agreement of recommendations. Oxford City Council, Town Hall, St Aldate's, Oxford OX1, 1BX, authorities, executive arrangements, access to information, England, regulations 2012, on the grounds that their presence could involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as described in specific paragraphs of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. The committee may maintain the exemption if and so long as, in all the circumstances of the case, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. So the important bit kind of right at the end of that there, but I think I'm covered having read it. So thank you, Duncan.